So, this month, we are going to be exploring the topic of emotions. And to get us started here today, we're going to be taking a look at a moment in the life of Jesus, though maybe not a moment you would necessarily expect, because I kind of feel like if any of us were to take a quick brainstorm of, oh, how does Jesus express and experience emotions? We might point to moments like when Jesus turns over the tables in the temple, or Jesus weeping at Lazarus's tomb, or Jesus sweating blood in the Garden of Gethsemane. And those are great examples. And maybe they'll come up as we go through the rest of the month. But for many of us, we experience our emotions both in those overt sorts of ways and also in more subtle ways all the time. And so I thought it might be nice to look at a subtler moment in the life of Jesus that I think turns out to be quite a bit more significant than we would otherwise give it credit for, because so many things when we read, they go by so quickly. And so this is Mark chapter 7, verses 31 through 35. And it says this: Then Jesus left the vicinity of Tyre and went through Sidon down to the Sea of Galilee and into the region of the Decapolis. There, some people brought to him a man who was deaf and could hardly talk. And they begged Jesus to place his hand on him. So after he took the man aside, away from the crowd, Jesus put his fingers into the man's ear. Then he spit and touched the man's tongue. And then he looked up to heaven and with a deep sigh said to the man, "Iphatha," which means be opened. And at this, the man's ears were opened and his tongue was loosened and he began to speak plainly. And so, having read that, first of all, it's sort of interesting to note that the passage tells us that the man was hardly able to talk. That's a unique sort of frustration, to be able to talk a little bit, but not fully be able to talk. And I think, for many of us here in the States, we tend to get a strong education in Helen Keller. Almost everybody learns about Helen Keller in our curriculums. So we all kind of have a sense of the struggles that exist for a person with multiple communication barriers. And if we further go ahead and put ourselves in the position of the one who needs healing, maybe each of us would be able to communicate ways in which we feel like, yeah, maybe I too have multiple communication barriers, either all the time or sometimes in my own life. Maybe all of that kind of consideration then can then help us situate ourselves in the middle of where Jesus and this man are. Somehow we can be a part of that experience. There's difficulty and there's frustration that's involved. And the people bringing this man to Jesus, we're told that they're begging for Jesus's help, like just frustrated and desperate and looking for just anything that could help. And so in the middle of that, Jesus tries to establish a little privacy, right? Like kind of take the man aside. And these kind of seem like odd healing techniques, this business of touching the ears and spitting and then touching the man's tongue. That can seem kind of odd, but some people kind of think it's just a way that Jesus could use to communicate. Like, we are healing your ears, we are healing your speaking, just a way to sort of do that. I don't know for sure, but I think that's at least an interesting theory. But then this all important moment comes up in verse 34, where we hear that Jesus looks up to heaven and then lets out a deep sigh. And I kind of feel like we could read right past that deep sigh there, because right after that, immediately comes that command for healing, that healing happens, and then we're on. We move right into the next thing. So it's easy for that deep sigh to get lost in the text. But in point of fact, the Greek word for that deep sigh is this word anastenazo. And it translates in our language as a deep sigh. Yes, but it's kind of more than that. Some definitions talk about it being a sigh that draws up from the bottom of the breast or from like the deep within oneself. So it's a sigh that's expressed more in the midst of deep grief. It's drawn out, even could be described as a groan, if you will. And that's kind of interesting because if we think about Jesus's whole experience of living at this particular time in his life, Jesus heals crowds of people on many, many days, right? It's like story after story of they brought the people to Jesus and Jesus prayed all day long. There were so many people, they're dropping them through the roofs of houses. People are crying out and begging for Jesus' help and touching his garments as he's walking. Every day there's these kinds of stories. So this is not the only deaf and mostly mute person that he's encountering. It's not the first. It's kind of all over his life. And Jesus, to be sure, like has a sense that this is not going to last, that this man's going to get healed right here. So what causes that strong sigh of grief to come up for Jesus? Where does that strong emotion come from? Why does it come up? And, speculation is speculation. What do any of us really know? But if I think about the context of how Jesus moves through his days and what causes him to move forward and to keep doing this work, what comes up a lot in the scriptures is this word compassion, that Jesus had compassion. He was suffering with the people that he was encountering. That's what the word compassion means, to suffer with. And so we're told this a lot. And so I kind of think like maybe it's possible that what Jesus was experiencing here was that very thing, just feeling the struggle of this person that he's encountering right there. So for many of us, if we just think about our own experience then of living near others, working with others, trying to be helpful to others, we kind of know that maintaining a compassionate heart, like keeping that up moment to moment, day to day, it can be difficult to do, to stay with it and to stay present in all of those things. We tend to run into moments where the heart kind of wants to close and it kind of wants to protect itself a little bit. And so when it comes to dealing with our emotions or not, dealing with emotions tends to be a big part of, can the heart stay open or is the heart closed? And for each and every one of us, we have these choices that we are needing to make all of the time as our emotions start to kind of flare, as they start to move up on that bell curve that we've talked about. And when that happens, sometimes what we try to do is resist it. And so if you've ever found yourself fighting back tears, that's a perfect example of trying to resist the emotion, trying to not have that emotion right now. Sometimes we don't want to explain our tears to other people, right? There's tons of really good reasons in a way for why we do these things. Or we kind of figure maybe this isn't the right time for an emotion, or maybe we're like, if I let this out, it's going to get really big. And so I need to wait until I can do that more. And so sometimes we try to resist the emotion. And at other times, we kind of try to push the emotion away, try to get our minds on something else. I'll just get some work done, or I'll get some cleaning done. Or sometimes people talk about retail, like I'll try to purchase something, or I'll try to watch something funny, which is apparently why cat videos have totally blown up on YouTube. But when it comes to our emotions, we do have other options. One of which is we can kind of choose to simply have the emotion. And there are good reasons for this to be our choice. People from nearly every single faith background, if you go and you kind of read through what people believe from different faiths, every single one of them seems to believe that feeling our emotions helps us to have happier and more content lives overall, because this is the way that the heart stays open. And so if we think back to Mark chapter 7, that's exactly what Jesus is doing in that moment. He's having an emotion right there in the middle of everything. Even as he's about to pray for this man, he lets out all of the weight that comes along with that man's story, all of the sorrow that he's feeling kind of on behalf and with this man in the form of this deep sigh, this groan that's kind of rising up. And this, I think, is what allows Jesus's heart to remain open, that he doesn't just stifle all of that or kind of try to keep praying, keep moving through, keep pushing on. And so if that's Jesus's posture, and Jesus is often a good model for us, how do we follow Jesus in that? How do we remain open ourselves and develop that ability to have our emotions when we need to have them? And so, to help us answer that question, it turns out there are spiritual practices that we can engage that can help us choose that feeling our emotions thing, to feel them and then ultimately be able to move on from them. Because as we've talked about in the past, feelings have a bit of a bell curve. They raise to kind of a peak and then they fade away again. So, the first spiritual practice is that we can work to kind of recognize and accept that there is an emotion there. And this can seem so obvious, but there are so many ways in which this is a struggle. So, a friend of mine recently told a story from early on in his marriage. And he said, like, there's this moment, and we were having this disagreement about something. And I went into the bedroom, and she followed me in, and she said, what's the matter? And he said, I said to her, I'm just really sad right now. And she said, really? Because it doesn't sound like you're sad. It sounds like you're mad. And that's kind of a relatable thing for all of us a little bit, I think. For whatever reason, it's really common to feel within ourselves that some emotions are more acceptable than others. Maybe it's okay to be sad, but it's not okay to be mad, type of a thing. So it can be really easy to almost unknowingly substitute one emotion that we think is more acceptable for one that we think is not, and to not really express this is how I'm feeling ultimately. But in the end, does it really help? That's the question. So maybe the first step in all of it is just being able to put more accurate words to what we're feeling. So for a while in our house, there was a feelings wheel that was up on the fridge. And this is one example. There's a ton of them. You can Google them, but it kind of categorizes, and there's kind of a root emotion in the center, but then many things that we might be feeling that kind of fans out from there. And in addition to our feelings wheel, there were also these feeling magnets, and the feeling magnets still exist. So there's like a face that kind of tries to explain the emotion, and then the word of that emotion as well. And it wouldn't be that unusual if someone in our house was having a big feeling for one of the kids to go grab a bunch of the magnets and bring them over and be like, which one of these do you feel? Do you feel more or less of some of these? And to just start to have that language for what it is that's going on inside of us. And it can seem a bit odd to do that, especially when we're not used to it, if we haven't been in the habit of it. But that's kind of the point, is to get used to it and find that place, because we're trying to be able to recognize and accept the emotion we're having. And kind of along with that, another thing that we can do is begin to investigate, to learn more, to go deeper into what all of that is. And so this is all about the noticing. It's kind of asking ourselves all sorts of questions like, did I just feel heat rise up in my body? Like, did I just feel this heat flush up into my face? What is that? What emotion is that? Or am I in a meeting? Is my heart racing somehow? Or is there a reason, like maybe I'm going and I'm looking for food? Is there a reason beyond hunger that I'm looking for food right now? Or, why are my eyebrows furrowed so far down into my nose right now? Just kind of looking for the clues in our body. Is there a deeper emotion behind even the first emotion that I'm identifying? So, for instance, with anger, we tend to find that what people are feeling behind anger is often fear or vulnerability. And so feelings wheels, again, can help us kind of look for root emotions and what might be at the core of all of that. And then just one other spiritual practice for today. We can engage the practice of non identification. And this may sound a little bit unusual. Like, what is non identification? But it's actually a very simple thing in practice. So, non identification is the understanding that we have feelings, but we are not the feeling that we are having. So, for example, if I am feeling lonely, what we might be conditioned to say is, I'm lonely, right? How are you? I'm lonely, which can inadvertently, like, it's not like we mean it, but it can send us the message that somehow we embody this loneliness. And as that becomes the message, you can imagine that's not a great state of mind for us to be living in. And so instead of calling ourselves the emotion as if that's our name, we can do something different. We can say things like, I'm having the feeling that I'm lonely. I'm having the feeling that I'm sad or angry or frustrated, and on and on. And then, similar to Jesus in Mark 7, rather than try to push it away by diving into a distraction, right? Well, I'm just going to go to work. I'm going to watch TV, or I'm going to play a game, or I'm going to scroll through a bunch of stuff. Maybe we kind of sit with it and we get curious about it. Like, okay, is that emotion in my body somewhere? Am I feeling tenseness in my stomach? Is my neck tight? What's going on? Is my mind racing? Is it showing up in my thought process? What clues exist to help me kind of figure this out about myself? And in fact, there are two words that we can use to describe what we're talking about here. It's called the sacred pause. And we see Jesus do this in Mark chapter 7, even though it happens sort of fast. But he touches the man's ears and he spits and he touches the man's tongue and he looks up to heaven. And just for that split second, he pauses and he lets out this deep sigh, right? Groaning out the emotion that he's feeling. And then he commands the man's ears and tongue to open. And so sometimes it may be that kind of a split second, that would be way too fast. It wouldn't be enough. Sometimes we're going to need a longer pause. And then sometimes, and maybe even as we become skilled and we've done this more often, maybe we can do it in that split second type thing. But it's okay if we need a more private space. And so we get away for a moment. We take our pause in private. But as again, we become skilled and we get used to it, we might be able to say, like, no, I can do this right here. I can have a little bit of this emotional release. And Jesus models that possibility for us to take that moment right where we stand, right when we need it. And so as we get better and better, maybe some of this helps us to keep that heart center open and be able to live in this light and love that we've talked so much about, right? I want to access that light and that love within. I want to be connected to that. So maybe this is a part of that story. So I want to give us a chance to at least get started on this practice together. And it's a bit like, you can't necessarily conjure an emotion, but just have the chance to start. And what's more, if you are having emotions, this might not be enough time for processing. So you might want to come back and do more of this later. But from wherever we are, taking a moment to settle into a prayerful space. And so, Lord Jesus, I do pray for each and every one of my friends here, that as we are hearing all of this, we are hearing your story of living a life that includes emotion. I pray that some of the noise in our own selves could kind of settle, and that we'd find ourselves being able to breathe in deeper cleansing breaths, being thankful for that life that moves through us by way of our breath. And then exhaling weight and toxicity and frustration. we take a moment to just be open to your love and your leading, Jesus. And in the midst of that, would you help us become aware of anything that we're feeling in our bodies, even now? And if we do become aware of a space in our body, even just to be able to put a hand on that particular spot, to bless it with the love and kindness of God, to have compassion for it. Lord, I pray that you would also help us to consider, are there any thoughts that we've been having lately? Is there any way that the mind has been on a little bit of a treadmill, to be able to become aware of that? If there are ways in which we are realizing, yes, there have been some thoughts that are really pervasive, to even touch that space in our bodies with kindness, and to even say to ourselves, may I be happy and healthy. May I be at peace. May I be at ease. And then even just pausing a little bit to notice what emotions might be connected to these things and these clues that I'm noticing. If there are emotions coming to mind, remembering we are not our emotions, having the emotion that. And emotions come and they go. And then finally, is there anything I feel the Spirit prompting me towards? Do I sense a connecting point, an action point, or a need for rest or something else? Is there anything that I feel prompted towards in my spirit? So, Lord, I do pray for each of my friends here that as we are going about our days, that as we have these emotions come up, that this would be useful, this conversation about being able to feel the emotion and release and let go of emotion as well. I pray that you would bless each and every one of us as we kind of walk forward on this journey where emotion is concerned and how it affects our hearts, our love center, how it affects our bodies, how it affects our minds. And Lord, I do pray for this happiness and contentment that comes as we are able to live these more holistic lives. So I pray blessing over that journey for each and every one of my friends here. Amen.